Commander Veltherax had seen many species grovel before the Galactic Council. The small, pink-skinned biped sitting across the negotiation table, however, seemed to have missed that particular memo. So let me get this straight, the human female named Captain Elena Voss said, tapping her fingers against the polished surface. You want us to surrender our entire solar system, relocate our population to designated reservation planets, and hand over all our technological assets? She paused, her lips curving into what Veltherax had learned was called a smile, though this one carried no warmth. And in exchange, you'll graciously allow us to continue existing? Veltherax's tentacles twitched with amusement. The audacity of these creatures never ceased to entertain him. Here they sat, representatives of a species barely capable of faster-than-light travel, questioning terms that had been accepted by civilizations 1,000 times more advanced. Captain Voss, he replied, his translator converting his harmonic tones into their crude vocal patterns, your species has demonstrated concerning aggressive tendencies. The destruction of the Krelian mining facility was quite excessive. The human delegate beside her, Ambassador Marcus Reed, shifted uncomfortably. That facility was strip mining Europa without authorization. Our response was measured. Measured? Counselor ZHYTHera interjected, her insectoid mandibles clicking with what passed for laughter among her kind. You turned an asteroid belt into a weapon and obliterated a facility worth 17 billion credits. Captain Voss shrugged. Should have asked permission first. Veltherax found himself genuinely impressed by their nerve. Most species would be trembling before the combined might of the Galactic Council. These humans sat there like they were discussing the weather. It was almost refreshing. Perhaps, Minister Cranthel suggested, his scaled hide shifting from blue to amber, we should remind our guests of their position. One planet. No significant fleet. Barely 2 centuries of space travel. And yet, Captain Voss said, leaning back in her chair, here we are, having peace talks instead of you just taking what you want. Her brown eyes glittered with something Veltherax couldn't quite identify. Makes me wonder why that is. The silence that followed was delicious. Veltherax had to admit, these humans had a point. The Council commanded fleets that could glass entire star systems. They possessed technology that could manipulate matter at the quantum level. They had conquered civilizations that wielded powers beyond most species' comprehension. So why were they sitting here, negotiating? Your point being? Veltherax asked, genuinely curious. My point, Captain Voss said, standing slowly, is that maybe you've realized something about humans that you didn't expect. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Veltherax noticed how the other human delegates tensed, as if they knew what was coming. Ambassador Reed actually closed his eyes and muttered something under his breath. And what might that be? Counselor ZHYTHera demanded. Captain Voss walked to the massive viewport that dominated one wall of the negotiation chamber. Beyond the transparent aluminum, the Council's flagship hung in space like a metallic leviathan. Thousands of smaller vessels surrounded it, a display of power meant to intimidate. You've realized, she said quietly, that we're absolutely insane. The confession hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Veltherax felt his primary heart skip a beat. Around the table, the other council members exchanged glances that ranged from confusion to dawning horror. I'm sorry. Minister Cranthel said, his hide now a nervous yellow. Captain Voss turned from the viewport, and Veltherax saw something in her expression that made his tentacles curl involuntarily. It wasn't fear or desperation. It was the look of someone who had done the math and found the results hilarious. You want to know why you're here negotiating instead of just taking our little blue marble? She asked. It's because your intelligence reports finally came back from the Outer Rim conflicts. The blood in Veltherax's veins turned to ice water. The Outer Rim conflicts. Where human mercenaries had been hired to settle territorial disputes between minor species. The reports had been disturbing. The vegan trading consortium hired 300 human soldiers to resolve their mining dispute with the Altarian collective, Captain Voss continued, her voice conversational. Standard engagement. The Altarians had superior numbers, better technology, established defensive positions. Ambassador Reed pinched the bridge of his nose. Elena, please don't, the humans won in 6 hours, she continued, ignoring him. Want to know how? Veltherax found himself leaning forward despite every instinct screaming at him to run. How? They strapped explosives to their own transport ships, rammed them into the Altarian orbital stations, then dropped to the planet's surface in escape pods while the enemy was dealing with the debris field. Captain Voss's smile had returned, but now it looked genuinely terrifying. 47 humans died in the initial assault. They called it acceptable losses and kept fighting. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of life support systems. Veltherax realized he had stopped breathing. Or there was the Proxima incident, Captain Voss went on cheerfully. Pirates had taken a human cargo vessel hostage. Standard procedure, negotiate, pay ransom, everyone goes home. Except the human crew decided they'd rather vent the entire ship's atmosphere than let the pirates have their cargo of medical supplies. That's... Counselor Zhythychera's mandibles clicked nervously. That's suicide. Exactly. Captain Voss clapped her hands together, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the sudden quiet. They chose to die rather than let medicine meant for a colony world fall into the wrong hands. The pirates couldn't understand it. Neither could anyone else. Veltherax felt a creeping realization dawn on him. Every species the Council had conquered shared certain rational behaviors. They valued survival above all else. They could be threatened, bargained with, coerced. But these humans, you're describing a species with no survival instinct, Minister Cranthel said slowly. Oh no, Captain Voss corrected, we have excellent survival instincts. We just define survival differently than you do. She walked back to the table, but didn't sit. Instead, she placed both hands on the surface and leaned forward, her gaze moving from one council member to the next. See, when you conquer a species, you rely on their desire to survive overriding their desire to fight. You make the cost of resistance higher than the cost of surrender. It's logical. It's efficient. It's worked for thousands of years. Veltherax found himself nodding despite his growing unease. But humans? Captain Voss's smile widened. We'd rather burn the whole galaxy down than kneel to tyrants. And we're just crazy enough to do it. The threat hung in the air like toxic gas. Around the table, some of the galaxy's most powerful beings suddenly looked very small. You're bluffing, Counselor Zhythychera said, but her voice lacked conviction. Am I? Captain Voss straightened up. Tell me, Counselor, what do you know about human historical warfare? Some limited data. We once had a global war that lasted 6 years and killed 60 million of our own people rather than submit to a dictator, Captain Voss said casually. We developed weapons capable of sterilizing our entire planet, built enough of them to destroy civilization 50 times over, then spent decades pointing them at each other just to prove we weren't afraid to use them. Veltherax's tentacles had gone completely rigid. This wasn't possible. No species could be that self-destructive and still achieve space flight. You're describing a pathological inability to accept defeat, he managed to say. Exactly. Captain Voss beamed at him like he was a particularly bright student. Humans don't surrender. We adapt, we innovate, we escalate. And if we can't win? She shrugged eloquently. Well, we make sure nobody else wins either. The silence stretched for long moments. Finally, Minister Cranthel spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything, Captain Voss replied. I'm explaining why you called for peace talks instead of just taking what you wanted. She gestured toward the viewport. You have enough firepower out there to turn Earth into cosmic dust. But you won't use it. Want to know why? Veltherax realized he was holding his breath again. Because you've figured out that if you attack Earth, every human in the galaxy will spend the rest of their very short lives making yours miserable. We'll turn your trade routes into killing fields. We'll sabotage your infrastructure. We'll teach every enslaved species in your empire that the secret to freedom is being willing to die for it. Captain Voss began walking around the table, her footsteps echoing in the chamber. And worst of all, we'll do it with a smile on our faces, because making tyrants suffer is what humans call a good time. She stopped behind Veltherax's chair, and he could feel her presence like ice against his carapace. So here's what's going to happen, she said softly. You're going to leave our solar system alone. You're going to compensate the families of everyone who died on that mining facility. And you're going to rethink this whole galactic empire thing you've got going on. And if we refuse? Veltherax asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Captain Voss's reflection appeared in the viewport surface, and her smile was absolutely terrifying. Then you'll learn why the universe's most dangerous phrase is, "Hold my beer and watch this." The emergency session convened 37 minutes after Captain Voss and her delegation returned to their quarters. Veltherax found himself staring at intelligence reports that painted an increasingly horrifying picture of humanity's recent activities across the galaxy. This cannot be accurate, Counselor ZHYTHERA insisted, her mandibles clicking frantically. No species deliberately engineers their own obsolescence. Admiral KWXTAR, the Council's military commander, gestured at the holographic display floating above the conference table. The data is verified through 17 independent sources. Humans have been busy. The first image showed a small human freighter drifting in the void near the Centauri trade lanes. This vessel was intercepted carrying what appeared to be standard agricultural equipment, KWXTAR explained. Upon inspection, we discovered that the farming tools were actually components for 43 different types of improvised explosive devices. Veltherax's headache was getting worse. Weapons smuggling is hardly unprecedented. The interesting part, KWXTAR continued, is that the ship's manifest listed the cargo as party supplies. When questioned, the human captain insisted he wasn't lying. Apparently, humans consider explosives recreational. Minister Cranthel's hide had shifted to a sickly green color. What else? 3 days ago, a human merchant vessel responded to a distress call from a Helixian passenger liner under pirate attack, KWXTAR said. The display shifted to show wreckage scattered across several thousand kilometers of space. The merchant ship had no weapons, no shields, and a crew of 5 against 18 pirate vessels. They were slaughtered, I assume, Veltherax said, though something in KWXTAR's expression suggested otherwise. The pirates were destroyed. All of them. The admiral's tone carried a mixture of awe and terror. The humans loaded their cargo bay with volatile chemicals, accelerated to ramming speed, and used their ship as a guided missile. The explosion took out 6 pirate vessels. The surviving crew escaped in a shuttle and spent the next 4 hours hunting down the remaining pirates with nothing but handheld tools and what they called aggressive maintenance techniques. The chamber fell silent. Outside the viewports, the Council's mighty fleet continued its patrol, but Veltherax couldn't shake the feeling that all those ships might not be enough. There's more, KWXTAR said grimly. The humans have been establishing what they call cultural exchange programs throughout Council space. Cultural exchange? Counselor ZHYTHERA asked suspiciously. They're teaching other species human history. The Admiral manipulated the display, showing footage from a dozen different worlds. Specifically, they're sharing detailed accounts of successful rebellion movements, guerrilla warfare tactics, and something called civil disobedience. Veltherax watched as humans sat in circles with representatives from subjugated species, calmly explaining concepts like asymmetric warfare and infrastructure vulnerability analysis. What made it worse was how genuinely friendly and helpful the humans appeared while discussing methods of governmental overthrow. This is psychological warfare, Minister Cranthel realized. Gets better, KYXstar said dryly. They're also distributing something they call entertainment media. Fiction stories, historical documentaries, and instructional videos about human conflicts. The display showed titles that made Veltherax's tentacles curl with dread, how a handful of farmers defeated the galaxy's greatest empire, turning household items into effective weapons, and why dying free is better than living as a slave, a human perspective. They're radicalizing entire populations, Veltherax whispered. Worse, KYXstar replied. They're making it look fun. At that moment, the chamber's communication system chimed. Captain Voss's face appeared on the main screen, her expression deceptively pleasant. Good evening, honored counselors, she said with that terrible human smile. I hope you're enjoying the intelligence briefing. Yes, we know you called an emergency session. Your security is adorable, by the way. Veltherax felt his blood pressure spike. How did you, trade secret, Captain Voss interrupted cheerfully. I'm calling because Ambassador Reed thought it might be nice to share some additional context for your deliberations. Behind her, Veltherax could see other humans working at portable computer terminals, their faces lit by holographic displays showing star charts, fleet positions, and what appeared to be detailed schematics of council facilities. You see, Captain Voss continued, while you've been counting ships and calculating firepower, we've been having a completely different conversation. Would you like to know what we've really been doing for the past 6 months? I'm afraid to ask, Veltherax admitted. Smart man. Or, tentacle creature. Whatever you prefer. Captain Voss gestured off-screen, and another human joined her. This is Dr. Janet Kim, our head of xenobiology. Dr. Kim waved cheerfully at the camera. Hi there. I've been studying the fascinating biological diversity of council species. Did you know that your atmospheric processing systems have a critical vulnerability to a simple Earth fungus? It's quite remarkable, really. Veltherax's primary heart stopped beating entirely. And this, Captain Voss said as another human appeared, is Commander Jake Torres, our logistics coordinator. Torres grinned and held up a data pad. Turns out your supply chains are incredibly predictable. Same routes, same schedules, same security protocols. It would be almost trivial to disrupt them systematically. Almost like you've never faced an opponent willing to target civilian infrastructure. You're threatening non-combatants, Counselor ZHYTHera hissed. Oh no, Captain Voss said, looking genuinely offended. We would never harm innocent civilians. We're not monsters. Her expression brightened. We just shut down every trade route, communication relay, and supply depot in council space. No violence necessary. Just some creative engineering and aggressive scheduling adjustments. The humans on screen all laughed at this, as if the prospect of crippling galactic civilization was some sort of elaborate joke. You cannot be serious, Minister Cranthel said. Deadly serious, Captain Voss replied. But here's the beautiful part. We don't want to do any of this. We'd much rather sit on our little blue planet, invent ridiculous things, and argue with each other about sports. But if you force our hand, she shrugged, and somehow that simple gesture carried more menace than any weapon Veltherax had ever faced. The choice is yours, Captain Voss continued. You can accept our terms, withdraw from human space, and we'll all pretend this unpleasantness never happened. We might even share some of our more interesting technologies. Did you know we've figured out how to make faster-than-light communication networks nearly impossible to intercept? Admiral KYXstar leaned forward sharply. That's impossible. The quantum mechanics alone would be impossible for a rational species, Dr. Kim interrupted. But humans have this wonderful tendency to attempt things that should be theoretically impossible. Sometimes we succeed out of pure stubbornness. Of course, Captain Voss added thoughtfully, if you choose the other option and decide to test our resolve, well. She gestured to the humans working behind her. We've already identified 12 different ways to turn your own technology against you, mapped the locations of every critical council facility within 50 light-years, and established contact with 17 different resistance movements in your territory. Commander Torres held up his data pad again. Plus, we've got detailed psychological profiles on every council member. Veltherax, for instance, has a fascinating weakness for Altarian wine and a tendency to overthink problems when stressed. Veltherax's tentacles went rigid. How could they possibly know about his private habits? The point being, Captain Voss said, we've spent 6 months preparing for this conversation. While you were planning to intimidate us with displays of force, we were figuring out how to win a war against an enemy with superior technology and numbers. And your conclusion? Veltherax asked, though he dreaded the answer. Simple, Captain Voss replied. We can't win a conventional war. So we won't fight one. Instead, we'll make your entire empire too expensive to maintain and too dangerous to operate. Death by 1,000 cuts, applied with human creativity and persistence. The transmission shifted slightly, and Veltherax realized Captain Voss was now standing in what appeared to be a shuttle bay. Behind her, dozens of humans were loading equipment into small, unremarkable-looking vessels. These ships will be departing in approximately 1 hour, she announced casually. They're carrying our cultural exchange volunteers to every major population center in Council space. By this time next week, half your subject species will have detailed instructions on effective resistance techniques. You're declaring war, Counselor ZHYTHera said in horror. Actually, Captain Voss corrected, I'm giving you one last chance to avoid one. You have exactly 57 minutes to accept our terms and order your fleets to withdraw from human space. After that. She smiled that terrible smile again. Well, let's just say that humans have a saying, if you're going to be dumb, you better be tough. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Veltherax stared at the empty screen, his mind racing through calculations that all led to the same terrifying conclusion. Humanity possessed something far more dangerous than superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They had weaponized their own insanity, turned their self-destructive tendencies into a strategic advantage. We could glass their planet, Admiral Kwextar said weakly. And then spend the next century hunting down every human in the galaxy while our empire collapses around us, Veltherax replied. They've made it clear they're prepared for that scenario. Minister Kranthel's hide had turned completely white. So what do we do? Veltherax looked around the table at the most powerful beings in the galaxy, all of them reduced to terrified silence by a species that had barely learned to walk among the stars. The irony was almost poetic. We accept their terms, he said finally. And we pray to whatever gods we worship that they never decide to leave their solar system voluntarily. As if summoned by his words, Captain Voss's voice echoed through the chamber's communication system one final time. Oh, and counselors? Welcome to the wonderful world of human diplomacy. We do hope you'll enjoy your stay. Her laughter followed them long after the transmission ended, a sound that would haunt Veltherax's dreams for years to come. Outside the viewports, the mighty council fleet began its slow, humiliating withdrawal from human space. The age of galactic empire was over. The age of humanity had begun.